Cheers and salutations. Welcome back to Americans Learn. And today we are returning back to the theater of war known as Gaul. That's right. We are returning back to the second installment of Julius Caesar's campaign in Gaul. We will be covering the Gallic Wars. And in our previous episode, we learned that Julius Caesar won his first major victory over the Helvetii. But now, while he is building a name for himself and a presence in Gaul, his enemies are a-plotting and a-scheming in Rome. All the while, the various other tribes and factions are now aware that Rome is in their backyard. So, without further ado, since I'm in charge of the ones and twos, let's get our learn on and find out how Julius Caesar and his fantastic friends are going to get out of this quagmire.
Rumour had already reached him of a Germanic tribe that had crossed the Rhine and was terrorising Gaul. The Suebi, led by their king Ariovistus, had first arrived in Gaul in 63 BC as mercenaries for the Sequani and Arverni in their war against the Aedui, a Roman ally. The 15,000 warriors that Ariovistus initially brought proved decisive, helping to secure a crucial victory over the Aedui at the Battle of Magito Brega, which forced the Aedui to become a tributary to the Sequani. In response to this, the Aedui sent an envoy, Diviciacus, to ask Rome for help, but the Republic was still recovering from the political shock of the Catiline conspiracy and was distracted by an Allobroges revolt. The governor of Transalpine Gaul was ordered to help Rome's Gallic allies when possible, and in 59 BC, the Senate named Ariovistus a friend of the people of Rome to pacify him and keep him in check. Ariovistus used that time to consolidate his position. After helping the Sequani, he demanded a third of their lands as payment. The Sequani gave in, and Ariovistus began moving more of his people across the Rhine to settle in this new land. By 58 BC, as many as 120,000 Suebi had now crossed the Rhine and made their home in Gaul. Furthermore, Ariovistus was demanding more Sequani territory in order to settle an extra 24,000 Germans and had been taking hostages in order to keep the Sequani and Aedui obedient. Something had to be done.
Sounds like a real character, that guy. Wow. And again, this should show you again just how cutthroat politics and diplomacy were. Yes, the Romans had their own internal politics, but when it came down to then national politics, international, I guess at the time, is maybe that's fair enough to compare it to. Clearly, the tribes all had their own best interests at heart, all the while ignoring the expansive Roman Republic. It's interesting to see that, if one tribe was stronger than the other, they'd still conquer them and displace them. And this is something that Caesar used to his advantage. Not only the tribes fighting each other, but also, again, other potential tribes maybe outside of Gaul from Germany, or Germania at the time, invading into Gaul, to which, again, Caesar could take advantage of. And when the tribes are at their weakest, his legions will pounce on them.
Following his victory over the Helvetii, Caesar had taken some time to rest in Bibracte. Whilst encamped there, he was visited by a council of Gallic leaders and diplomats, led by Diviciacus. They complimented Caesar on his victory and implored him to intervene in the situation, pointing out that if the Germans continued their conquests, soon the Suebi would be directly bordering Roman territory. Caesar, again, was happy to oblige. As Ariovistus was a friend of Rome, however, Caesar could not immediately go to war. Instead, Caesar first invited Ariovistus to meet him, which was declined. Then he sent a diplomat to Ariovistus, asking him to return the Gallic hostages he had taken and to stop any hostilities. Caesar reminded him that if he were to comply, the Romans would still consider him a friend of Rome and not take any action against him. This was a good deal for Ariovistus. He'd be allowed to keep the lands he had already taken from the Sequani without a fight. Instead of accepting the terms, Ariovistus doubled down and sent a message back to Caesar saying that if the Romans could conquer where and how they liked, so could he. At the same time, the 24,000 new Germans who had crossed the Rhine were allowed to raise and pillage the Gallic lands as they pleased, with more Germans preparing to cross the river to join Ariovistus. Caesar now had his justification, as he had a legal decree from the Senate to protect Rome's Gallic allies. He could justify that the Suebi were threatening Rome's borders, and Ariovistus had forfeited his status as a friend of Rome by continuing to pillage the land of Rome's allies.
But here is the problem. It's most likely, and I don't want to say that he had true deep connections, but Ariovistus probably maybe had some alliances, maybe some pacts with certain Roman senators. And let's face it, if you call yourself the friend of Rome, or you're given that title, friend of Rome, there's probably been maybe 1 or 2 Roman senators, 3 or 4, who were part of that decree that allowed Ariovistus to have that title. And while Caesar can claim justification, what's interesting is that this is probably one of the many things that caused 1 or 2 of Caesar's critics to start calling him out. Because again, while the people in Rome loved Caesar, the senators were all being petty and jealous of his success in Gaul.
Yet again, Caesar had the chance to market himself as the saviour of Gaul. Gathering his 6 legions, roughly 30,000 men, Caesar set out on the warpath. Both Ariovistus and Caesar recognized the importance of Vesontio, the largest town in the Sequani territories. Well fortified and well supplied, it would be crucial to the war effort. Both forces began marching to the town. However, the Romans, marching day and night, were able to get there first. Caesar rested there briefly while supplying the legions. But as they rested, rumours began reaching the men of the strength and ferocity of the Germans. Even some of Caesar's officers began having their doubts, and it almost seemed as if Caesar would have a mutiny on his hands. Caesar was, however, able to restore order,
because he named one legion in particular, the 10th Legion,
by insisting that he would face Ariovistus with just his most trusted 10th Legion if none others would follow. This inspired a fanatical loyalty in the 10th Legion, whilst the others, motivated by shame at being thought of as cowards, rallied, and the legions began to march out to meet the Suebi. Ariovistus, impressed with the speed at which the Romans had been able to move and take Vesontio, sent messages to Caesar asking for a meeting, with only some cavalry allowed as bodyguards, at the place called Vosges in modern-day Alsace. Caesar agreed, but the meeting did not go well, with both generals reiterating their positions. Ariovistus even went so far as to say that if he were to kill Caesar, there would be many in Rome that would be grateful, showing that he knew what the political situation in Rome was. Negotiations broke down after this, and the cavalry on both sides had a minor skirmish before retreating.
What I said earlier. And that probably caused Caesar to maybe reevaluate his situation and probably also call for tighter security around his bases. The enemies of Caesar had a long reach. And before Caesar became the Caesar that we knew, he was still a general. And while he was part of the alliance with Pompey, even Pompey the Great couldn't protect him.
Back to their respective camps.
And this is before they had their falling out.
A few days later, Ariovistus asked for another meeting.
I'm sorry. After the first meeting went to crap, there's no way I want to do a second meeting with you.
Caesar, sensing a trap, sent his translators. This was just as well, as Ariovistus promptly captured the two and even considered burning them alive. With his plan to capture Caesar having failed, Ariovistus instead moved to battle. His army was composed of 6,000 cavalry, 16,000 light infantry, and the rest heavier infantry, for a total of around 30 to 40,000 men. Taking Caesar by surprise, Ariovistus marched his force quickly behind Caesar's position and set up camp, cutting off the Romans from their supply lines. For 5 days, Caesar drew out his army in battle formation, willing to give battle, but Ariovistus was content to wait and strangle Caesar's supply line, only engaging in cavalry skirmishes. The Suebi cavalry fought in a unique fashion. For every horseman, there was an infantryman mixed into their formation. These men were lightly armed in order to keep up with the cavalry, and together provided a flexible and difficult force to handle, and the Roman cavalry got the worse of the fighting.
Ow.
Caesar, knowing that he would have to do something to break the stalemate or else risk being starved out, formed his legions into 3 lines. He marched this force past the Suebi position and ordered the 3rd line to begin construction of a second camp, whilst the first 2 lines formed up to defend them. Ariovistus sent all of his light infantry and cavalry to harass the legionaries, but seemed reluctant to commit his entire force, and so they were easily held off by the Romans. With the second camp complete, Caesar left 2 legions and part of his auxiliaries to defend it, whilst his other 4 legions returned to the main camp. Realizing that Caesar would now be able to use this second camp to reconnect with his supply line, Ariovistus sent part of his army to attack this second camp. The fighting was tough, lasting from midday into the evening, but eventually the Romans were able to repel the attack and even took some prisoners. Upon questioning these Suebi, Caesar learnt that Ariovistus had apparently been told by his priests not to commit his army until after the new moon, which was why he had not used his whole army to prevent the legions constructing their second camp.
So, something else we should also take into account, while we are laughing at it, in antiquity, ancient antiquity, there were many kings and generals, senators and statesmen, who would move their forces under the advice of priests or people who could read the entrails of a goat or a pig. And I have to say, there was a lot of chances in which those priests' advice led to the downfall of said army. So I guess Caesar now knows what to do. You got to get the Suebi to fight.
Having learnt this, Caesar decided to go on the offensive. Leaving a small garrison in each camp, Caesar formed his 6 legions into a triple-axis formation with his cavalry in reserve and marched on the Suebi camp. The Germans came out to meet him, forming their wagons and baggage train into a semicircle behind them, their women standing on them urging the men on. Noticing that the German left flank was slightly weaker, Caesar positioned himself opposite on the Roman right and gave the order for his men to charge. But as he did, the Suebi also charged. Their assault was so fast and surprising that the Romans had to drop their pila before they could even throw them, drawing their swords and fighting in hand-to-hand combat. The Germans managed to form a shield wall, and neither side seemed able to gain an upper hand. Having been unable to throw their javelins before charging, the Romans struggled to break the shield wall as easily as they had at the Battle of Bibracte. After some hard fighting, the Roman right, led by Caesar, started to push back the German left. However, the Suebi on the right outnumbered their Roman opponents and were starting to get the upper hand. The Roman cavalry, led by the son of Triumvir Marcus Licinius Crassus, Publius, had not yet engaged in the battle, and from his position he could see the Roman left starting to crumble. Using his own initiative, Crassus led the third line, which had been kept in reserve, to support the flank, arriving just in time to avoid a disaster. With their left flank broken and their right now under severe pressure, the Suebi army broke and ran. It is not known how many people died in this battle, but the Germans attempting to retreat through their wagons were said to have been packed so tightly that the dead could not even fall over. The entire Suebi force, including Ariovistus, fled back across the Rhine, pursued by the Roman cavalry. Wow. Caesar had won 2 important campaigns in one season. For now, he left Labienus to winter with the legions in Sequani territory, whilst he attended to his governing duties in Cisalpine Gaul. But by wintering his legions in Gallic territory, Caesar was making a point. This was beginning to look less like intervention and more like occupation.
All right, and we're going to stop there. There's a lot to address here. So Ariovistus survived that devastating battle, and all the land that the Suebi conquered, it's now gone, greatly reduced. We see that Caesar won not one, but 2 major victories in one season, and it's no longer looking like intervention, but more like occupation. Now, I am not an expert in Roman history, but I do like to read about ancient Rome, especially people like Julius Caesar, Augustus, Pompey Magnus, etc., etc., etc. But from what I do know about the war in Gaul is that as soon as Caesar was making himself look like an occupying force there, again, earning the love of the people, great, but he was making enemies in the Senate. And Caesar was now putting himself in a very dangerous situation, a very precarious situation, because in Rome, especially in the Senate, you need to have allies and friends. And while I am using the word allies and friends, most likely you had to build relationships in which no one was breathing down your neck or getting too jealous of you. And let's face it, many of these Roman senators, well, they had very thin skin, and they didn't like the idea of someone hogging all of the limelight. And Julius Caesar was that person who was taking all the glory, all the limelight, all the love. And with Ariovistus making that statement that there would be some people in Rome that would like to see Caesar dead, perhaps maybe this video will go into detail about what Caesar was thinking about the overall campaign in Gaul, but also about his situation in Rome once his campaign is done and finished. So in order for us to continue on with this adventure, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Americans Learn. We will be continuing on with this adventure. If this is stuff you want to see more of, if you want to see more of ancient Rome, if there's any documentaries, series, or other ancient kingdoms or empires you would like us to talk about, look at, learn, please type in the comment section below. We would love to have your feedback. My name is Kit. Take good care of yourselves, and always remember, long live the Roman Empire. Take care, folks. I'm out of here.